My name is Amanda Foster. I'm 29 years old, a graphic designer living in Portland, Oregon, in a cozy apartment in the Pearl District that my husband Brandon and I have been renting for the past year. Life felt good, stable, even. I had a career I loved, a husband I adored, and what I thought was a solid relationship with his family. Everything seemed normal until 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when I received a phone call from my mother-in-law, Diane, that would change everything. Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet, as she explained that this year's Thanksgiving dinner would be different. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She told me I wasn't quite ready to sit with the adults at the main dining table yet. Instead, I'd be helping in the kitchen and eating with the younger cousins in the separate room. At first, I thought she was joking, but the silence that followed my nervous laugh told me she was dead serious. When I tried to ask what she meant by not being ready, she simply said we'd talk about it later and hung up. I stood there in my living room, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. Something felt deeply wrong, like I'd just been told I wasn't really part of the family I'd married into 2 years ago. The worst part was the way she said it. So matter of fact, as if my exclusion was the most reasonable thing in the world. That phone call happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home, finishing up a logo design for a client when Diane's number flashed on my screen. We didn't talk often outside of family gatherings, so seeing her call in the middle of the day felt unusual. I answered cheerfully, expecting maybe she needed help picking something up or wanted to discuss Thanksgiving menu ideas. Instead, her voice carried that particular tone I'd come to recognize over the years, the one that sounded friendly but had an edge of authority underneath. She started with pleasantries, asking about my work and how Brandon was doing at his sales job. Then she transitioned into Thanksgiving plans, talking about how many people would be attending this year, how she'd ordered a larger turkey, how the dining room would be set up differently to accommodate everyone. That's when she dropped it. Amanda dear, I've been thinking about the seating arrangements, and I believe it would be best if you helped me in the kitchen this year. You know, with Jessica and the other women, you can eat with the younger ones afterward. We need someone reliable to help serve, and you're so good at being helpful. I remember my hand tightening around my phone. The younger ones she was referring to were Brandon's teenage cousins, kids ranging from 13 to 17. I was 29 years old, a grown woman, married to her son. Why would I be eating with teenagers instead of at the adult table with my husband? I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her to clarify. Diane, I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying I can't sit with Brandon and everyone else at the main table? There was a pause, just long enough to make me uncomfortable. Well, sweetheart, it's not that you can't, it's just that you're not quite ready yet. These dinners are for family who've proven themselves, who understand our traditions and values. You're still learning. Give it time. Another year or two, and I'm sure you'll earn your place at the table. Earn my place. Those words hit me like cold water. I'd been with Brandon for 5 years total, married for 2. How much more time did I need to prove myself? What exactly did I need to prove? I wanted to challenge her right then, to demand an explanation, but something in her tone warned me that pushing back would only make things worse. So I did what I'd been doing for years with the Foster family. I swallowed my frustration and said I'd think about it. Diane seemed satisfied with that response. She reminded me that dinner was at 3 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, and that I should arrive by noon to help with preparations. Then she hung up, leaving me sitting there feeling like I'd just been demoted in a family I'd tried so hard to be part of. Brandon came home from work that evening around 6. He found me sitting on our couch, staring at my laptop screen without really seeing it. He could tell something was off immediately. He dropped his messenger bag by the door and walked over, sitting down beside me with that concerned look he gets when he knows I'm upset. What's wrong, babe? Did something happen with a client? I closed my laptop and turned to face him. Your mom called today. About Thanksgiving. His expression shifted slightly, becoming guarded. Okay, what about it? I told him everything, watching his face carefully as I explained how Diane said I wasn't ready to sit at the adult table, how she wanted me in the kitchen and eating with the teenage cousins. I expected him to be outraged on my behalf, to immediately call his mother and straighten this out. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. Amanda, my family has always been traditional about these things. It's not personal. My mom just wants to make sure everyone understands how things work before they sit at the main table. I stared at him, waiting for the part where he'd say this was ridiculous, and that of course I'd be sitting with him. That part never came. So you think this is okay? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. You think it's fine that your wife, your actual wife, is being told to serve food and eat with children while you sit with the adults? He shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. It's just one dinner, Amanda. Can't you just go along with it to keep the peace? My mom works really hard on Thanksgiving. She doesn't need extra stress. I felt something crack inside me at those words. This wasn't about one dinner. This was about respect, about being seen as an equal member of the family I'd married into. But Brandon didn't seem to understand that. He kept talking about family harmony and traditions and how his mother had done things a certain way for decades. He mentioned that his sister Jessica had gone through something similar when she first started dating her ex-boyfriend years ago, as if that somehow made it acceptable. I went to bed that night feeling completely alone. Brandon fell asleep quickly beside me, apparently unbothered by the conversation we'd had. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Diane's words over and over. Not quite ready yet. Earn your place. Proven themselves. What did any of that even mean? I thought about all the foster family gatherings I'd attended over the years. The Sunday dinners at their house in Beaverton, where Diane controlled every aspect of the meal, from when we arrived to where we sat to what topics were acceptable for conversation. The birthday parties where I brought carefully chosen gifts that were received with polite thank yous, but never seemed quite right. The holidays where I helped clean up afterward, while the men watched football and the established family members relaxed. I'd always told myself it was just their way, that eventually I'd feel more integrated. But now, 2 years into my marriage, I was being explicitly told I still hadn't made the cut. The next morning I called my best friend Natalie during my lunch break. She's a nurse at Providence Hospital, and we've been friends since college. I needed to talk to someone who would give it to me straight. I met her at Riverside Cafe on the waterfront, a place we'd been going to for years whenever either of us needed to vent about life. Natalie took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. She ordered us both coffee and waited for me to start talking. When I told her about Diane's phone call and Brandon's reaction, her expression went from concerned to furious. "Are you kidding me right now?" she said loud enough that a couple at the next table glanced.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Over. His mother actually said you're not ready to sit with adults? And Brandon defended that? I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. Natalie reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Amanda, listen to me. This is not normal. This is not okay. You are a grown woman, a professional, a wife. The fact that your mother-in-law thinks she can rank you below teenagers and your husband won't stand up for you is a massive problem. Hearing someone else say it out loud made the situation feel more real, more serious. I'd been trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe this was just a quirky family tradition I didn't understand. But Natalie's reaction confirmed what I'd felt in my gut. This was wrong. She asked me what I was going to do about it. I admitted I didn't know. Part of me wanted to just skip Thanksgiving entirely, but that would cause a huge blow-up with Brandon's family. Part of me wanted to show up and make a scene, but I wasn't that kind of person. Natalie leaned back in her chair, studying me. You know what I think you should do? I think you should find out exactly what these so-called standards are that you're not meeting. Because I guarantee you there's more going on here than just weird family traditions. There's something they're not telling you. Her words stuck with me as I drove back to my apartment. What if there was more to this? What if Diane's dismissive treatment wasn't just about family hierarchy, but about something else entirely? I decided I needed more information. That evening, after Brandon left for his weekly basketball game with friends, I did something I'd never done before. I called his sister Jessica. We weren't close, not really. She was polite to me at family gatherings but never went out of her way to include me in anything. Still, she'd been part of this family her whole life. If anyone could explain the real rules, it would be her. She answered on the third ring, sounding surprised to hear from me. "Hey Amanda, what's up? Is everything okay with Brandon?" I assured her that Brandon was fine, and then awkwardly explained that I wanted to ask her about Thanksgiving. There was a pause on her end, and I could almost hear her choosing her words carefully. "Mom told me she talked to you," Jessica said finally. "Look, I know it seems weird from the outside, but it's just how our family works. There's a hierarchy. New people have to prove they're committed before they get full privileges." I felt my jaw clench. Privileges? We're talking about sitting at a dinner table, not joining an exclusive club. What exactly do I need to prove, Jessica? How do I move up in this hierarchy? Another pause. Well, it's different for everyone. Mom decides based on various factors. Whether you follow family rules, whether you show proper respect, whether you prioritize family obligations. She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. I pressed harder. And in 2 years, what have I done wrong? What rules have I broken? Jessica sighed. Amanda, I don't think this is something I should get in the middle of. Maybe you should talk to Mom directly. But before I could respond, she added something that made my blood run cold. Just be careful. Once Mom decides someone isn't family material, it's really hard to change her mind. And if Brandon doesn't stand up for you now, he probably never will. Then she said she had to go and hung up. I sat there holding my phone, Jessica's warning echoing in my head. Not family material. The phrase made me feel sick. I thought about my own family, my mother Patricia, who lived in Seattle, who'd raised me and my brother as a single parent after my father left. She'd always taught me that family was about love and support, not about proving yourself worthy. The contrast between my upbringing and the foster family dynamics had never felt starker. I texted my mom, asking if we could talk. She called me back within minutes. "Mom," I started, then found myself pouring out the entire situation. I told her about Diane's phone call, about Brandon's lack of support, about Jessica's cryptic warnings. My mother listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always loved about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "you know I've never been one to interfere in your marriage. But what you're describing sounds like the beginning of something that could get much worse. If your husband won't defend your place in his family now, what happens when you have children? What happens when bigger decisions need to be made? You need to know where you stand, not just with his mother, but with Brandon." Her words hit harder than I expected, because they touched on fears I'd been pushing down for months. Brandon and I had been talking about starting a family soon. We'd even discussed timelines, thinking maybe next year we'd try for a baby. But now I imagined bringing a child into this family dynamic. Imagined Diane having opinions about how I raised my kids. Imagined Brandon siding with his mother over me on parenting decisions. The thought made me feel trapped. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal around Brandon, but tension simmered between us. He could tell I was still upset about Thanksgiving, but he seemed to hope that if we just didn't talk about it, the issue would resolve itself. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about what Jessica had said. I decided I needed to understand more about the foster family dynamics, about what I was really dealing with. I started paying closer attention to things I'd previously overlooked. I thought back to previous family gatherings, replaying conversations and interactions in my mind. I remembered how Diane always sat at the head of the table with Richard beside her, how she controlled the flow of conversation, redirecting topics she didn't approve of. I remembered how Jessica always checked with her mother before making plans, even though she was 26 and lived independently. I remembered how Tyler, Brandon's older brother, had broken up with a girlfriend a few years ago shortly after Diane expressed disapproval of her career choice. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Diane's control extended far beyond holiday seating arrangements. She had her hand in every major decision her children made, from career moves to relationships to where they lived. Brandon talked to his mother at least 3 times a week, updating her on his life, asking her opinion on everything from investment choices to which car to buy. I'd always thought it was sweet that they were close. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. Was Brandon actually close with his mother, or was he afraid of disappointing her? I started noticing how his mood would shift after talking to Diane, how he'd become defensive if I questioned anything she said, how he'd frame her opinions as facts, rather than just one perspective. Friday afternoon, I left work early and drove to my mother's house in Seattle. It was a 2.5-hour drive, but I needed to be somewhere that felt safe, somewhere I could think clearly. My mom made tea and we sat in her small kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd done homework as a kid, where we'd had countless conversations over the years. She asked me what I was going to do about Thanksgiving. I told her I was seriously considering not going, staying home instead. She nodded slowly. And how do you think Brandon will react to that? I admitted I didn't know. Part of me hoped he'd choose to stay home with me, to show his family that his wife came first. But a bigger part of me suspected he'd go to his parents' house without me, unable to stand up to his mother's expectations. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. Amanda, sometimes the hardest thing about being in a relationship is learning that you can't change the other person. You can only decide what you're willing to accept. If Brandon isn't going to prioritize your feelings and your marriage over his mother's control, you need to know that now. Not next year. Not 5 years from now. Right now. Her words were hard to hear but necessary. I'd been hoping that things would somehow get better on their own, that time would solve the problem. But time doesn't fix fundamental issues about respect and priorities. I drove back to Portland that evening feeling clearer about what I needed to do. I needed to stop hoping Brandon would suddenly change and start figuring out what I was willing to tolerate in my marriage. When I got home, Brandon was making dinner, something he did occasionally when I worked late. He seemed relieved to see me in a better mood, probably hoping the Thanksgiving issue had blown over. We ate together, talking about our days, keeping things surface level. But my mind was working through a plan. I'd decided something on the drive home. I was going to do exactly what Diane expected of me on Thanksgiving. I was going to show up at noon to help in the kitchen. I was going to be the perfect helpful daughter-in-law. But I was also going to pay very close attention to everything that happened, every conversation, every interaction. I was going to gather information, figure out exactly what I was dealing with, and then make decisions based on facts rather than emotions. If this family had rules and hierarchies and tests, I wanted to know all of them. Because Natalie was right. There was more going on here than just seating arrangements. Part 2. The unsettling setup and initial boundary violation. The week leading up to Thanksgiving moved slowly, each day weighted with an anxiety I couldn't shake. I went through my normal routines at Pixelworks Design Studio, meeting with clients and working on projects, but my mind kept drifting back to what awaited me at the foster family home in Beaverton. I found myself replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Diane, searching for clues I might have missed about how she really viewed me. Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of designing a website mock-up when my desk phone rang. It was the main office line, which meant someone had called the studio directly rather than my cell. I picked up, expecting a client. Instead, Diane's voice came through the speaker, that same artificially sweet tone I'd come to recognize. "Amanda dear, I'm so glad I caught you at work. I wanted to go over some details about Thursday." I just want to make sure you know exactly what I'll need from you. I grabbed a pen, ready to take notes, assuming she'd tell me what dishes to bring or what time to arrive. But instead she launched into a detailed list of tasks. She needed me to arrive by 11:30, not noon, because the turkey would need basting every 30 minutes starting at noon, and she couldn't be tied to the kitchen the entire time. She needed me to set up the beverage station in the sunroom, arrange the appetizer platters, fold the napkins in a specific way she'd show me, keep the kitchen counters clear of dishes throughout the day, and make sure the coffee was ready by 2:30 for those who wanted it before the meal. Oh, and could I please wear something appropriate? Nothing too casual. We maintain certain standards at family gatherings. I wrote everything down, my hand moving mechanically across the paper while my stomach churned. This wasn't helping with Thanksgiving dinner. This was being assigned the role of household staff. When she finished her list, I forced myself to ask the question that had been burning in my mind all week. Diane, can I ask you something? What exactly do I need to do to be ready to sit with the family? What are the standards you mentioned? There was a brief silence on the other end, and I could almost picture her perfectly maintained smile tightening. Well, Amanda, it's not something I can just spell out for you. It's about demonstrating certain qualities over time: commitment to family, understanding our values, showing that you put the foster family first in your priorities. I've seen too many people marry into this family only to pull my children away from what matters. I need to know you're not one of those people. Her words felt like an accusation wrapped in politeness. Before I could respond, she continued. Jessica went through this process. So did Tyler's wife Claire before they divorced. It's nothing personal, sweetheart. It's just how we ensure that our family stays strong and unified. She made it sound so reasonable, so logical. But the underlying message was clear. I was on trial, and she was the judge. After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the list of tasks I'd written down. My coworker Kevin Chen rolled his chair over from the adjacent cubicle. He'd obviously overheard at least part of the conversation. Everything okay, Amanda? You look like someone just assigned you a term paper. I tried to laugh it off, but Kevin knew me too well. We'd been working together for 3 years, and he could always tell when something was bothering me. I gave him a brief summary of the Thanksgiving situation, expecting maybe some advice about dealing with difficult in-laws. Instead, his expression grew serious. Amanda, my sister went through something similar with her ex-husband's family. It started with little tests and requirements, proving herself worthy of their approval. By the time she realized what was happening, she'd completely lost herself trying to meet impossible standards. They divorced after 2 years. His words sent a chill through me. I wanted to believe my situation was different, that the foster family was just traditional and particular rather than controlling. But the parallels Kevin described felt uncomfortably familiar. That evening, Brandon came home from work in a good mood. His sales team had hit their quarterly targets, and he was talking about the bonus he'd receive. He suggested we go out to dinner to celebrate, and I agreed, hoping a nice meal together might ease some of the tension between us. We went to the Hearthstone, an upscale restaurant downtown that we'd been to a few times for special occasions. Over appetizers, Brandon seemed relaxed and happy, completely unaware that I was still churning inside about Thanksgiving. I waited until we'd finished our main course before bringing it up again. I told him about his mother's phone call, about the extensive list of tasks she'd assigned me, about her vague explanations regarding what I needed to prove. Brandon's good mood visibly deflated. He set down his wine glass and rubbed his temples. Amanda, why do you keep pushing this? My mom is just trying to include you in the preparations. She's giving you important responsibilities. That's a good thing. I stared at him across the table, candlelight flickering between us, and realized we were seeing the same situation through completely different lenses. To him, being assigned kitchen duties was an honor, a sign that his mother trusted me. To me, it was exclusion disguised as inclusion. I tried one more time to make him understand. Brandon, I'm your wife. We've been married for 2 years. Why am I still being tested? Why do I have to earn a place at the table when I'm already legally part of your family? He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around the restaurant as if worried other diners might overhear. You're making this into something it's not. My family has always done things a certain way. My mom had to prove herself to her mother-in-law too. It's just tradition, but I wasn't willing to let it go that easily. Did your mom have to prove herself after she was already married to your dad, or was this something she went through while they were dating? Brandon's silence answered my question. He picked up his wine glass again, taking a long drink before responding. Look, every family is different. Maybe my mom's standards are a little old-fashioned, but she means well. She just wants to make sure you're committed to being part of our family for the long term. And honestly, Amanda, the fact that you're fighting this so hard makes me wonder if you really want to be part of my family at all. His words stung more than I'd expected. He was turning my legitimate concerns into evidence that I was the problem, that I was the one failing to commit. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but refused to let them fall in the middle of the restaurant. We finished dinner in near silence and drove home without speaking. That night, lying in bed beside my husband who felt like a stranger, I made a decision. I would go through with Thanksgiving exactly as planned, but I would also start documenting everything. Every task assigned, every comment made, every instance where I was treated as less than a full family member. Because if this pattern continued, if Brandon continued to choose his mother's approval over his wife's dignity, I needed to face the truth about my marriage. Wednesday morning I woke up early and couldn't fall back asleep. Brandon was still sleeping soundly beside me, undisturbed by the conflict that kept me awake half the night. I got up quietly and made coffee, sitting at our small kitchen table and watching the sun rise over Portland's skyline. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. She was checking in, asking how I was holding up before the big day. I texted back that I was okay, though I wasn't sure that was true. She responded immediately. If you need an escape plan tomorrow, text me the word turkey, and I'll call with a fake emergency. The offer made me smile, despite everything. At least I had one person completely in my corner. I spent most of Wednesday working from home, trying to focus on client projects but constantly distracted by thoughts of the next day. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Brandon's mother calling from a different number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Amanda, it's Diane. I'm calling from Richard's phone because mine died. I just wanted to remind you to pick up those specific napkins I mentioned. The ivory linen ones, not cream. They need to be the right shade to match the tablecloth. I hadn't written down anything about picking up napkins. In fact, she'd never mentioned napkins in our previous conversation beyond showing me how to fold them. I told her I didn't recall getting that instruction. There was a pause, then a sigh. Well, I'm sure I mentioned it, dear. Regardless, can you stop by Nordstrom this afternoon? They should have exactly what I need in their home section. I'll text you a photo from my phone once it's charged. I felt my jaw tighten. I had client deadlines to meet, and she was sending me on errands with less than a day's notice. But before I could object, she continued. Oh, and one more thing. Brandon mentioned you two had dinner at the Hearthstone last night. That must have been expensive. I do hope you're both being financially responsible. You know, Richard and I believe in living within one's means and saving for the future. The comment felt invasive, like she was monitoring our spending and judging our choices. We're managing our finances just fine, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I'm sure you are, sweetheart. I just worry. Young couples these days often overspend on restaurants and entertainment when they should be building savings. When Brandon was single, he was so good about putting money away. I hope that hasn't changed. The implication was crystal clear. Since marrying me, Brandon had become financially irresponsible. Never mind that we split expenses equally, that we'd both agreed to celebrate his work bonus with a nice dinner, that our financial situation was none of her business. I got off the phone as quickly as possible, feeling my blood pressure rising. This was the pattern I was beginning to recognize. Every conversation with Diane contained subtle criticisms wrapped in concern, little jabs that positioned me as somehow lacking or problematic. I didn't go to Nordstrom that afternoon. I had legitimate work to finish, and I refused to drop everything for napkins that may or may not have actually been discussed. If Diane wanted specific napkins, she could get them herself or ask one of her other children. Around 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed with 3 text messages in rapid succession. The first was a photo of ivory linen napkins with a message that said, "These are the ones." The second was a follow-up saying, "Please confirm you picked these up." The third, arriving 15 minutes later when I hadn't responded to the first 2, said, "Amanda, did you get my messages? I really need those napkins for tomorrow." I took a deep breath and typed out a response. "I'm working on a client deadline this afternoon and won't be able to get to Nordstrom before they close. I'm sorry for the confusion about whether this was previously discussed, but I wasn't able to make it work with my schedule today." The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared immediately, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her response came through. "I see. Well, I suppose I'll have to make do with what I have. I just hope the table looks nice for our guests. It's important to me that everything is perfect for family gatherings, but I understand work comes first for some people." The guilt trip was so transparent, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so frustrating. I showed the text exchange to Brandon when he got home. I expected him to see how unreasonable his mother was being. Instead, he looked at me with disappointment. "Amanda, it was just napkins. You couldn't take 30 minutes to help my mom out. She's hosting a huge dinner tomorrow, and she's stressed." I felt something shift inside me at that moment. This wasn't about napkins. This was about Diane testing how much control she could exert, how high I would jump when she said jump, and whether Brandon would support his wife or his mother. He'd just shown me exactly where his loyalty lay. We didn't speak much the rest of Wednesday evening. Brandon watched television while I finished work in our home office. I kept thinking about what my mother had said about not being able to change other people, only deciding what I was willing to accept. Was I willing to accept a marriage where my husband consistently chose his mother's wants over my legitimate needs? Where I was expected to prove myself worthy of basic respect? Where my career and time were considered less important than his family's demands? I went to bed that night with those questions swirling in my mind, knowing that tomorrow would be a defining moment. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray, typical November weather in Portland. I woke up at 8, and immediately felt the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Brandon was already awake, scrolling through his phone in bed. He glanced over at me. "You still planning to come today?" His tone was neutral, but the question itself felt loaded, like he was giving me an out, or maybe hoping I'd back out so he wouldn't have to deal with the tension. "I'm coming," I said firmly. "I told your mother I would help, and I will." He nodded, seeming relieved. "Good. I think once you're there and part of everything, you'll see it's not as bad as you've built it up in your head." I didn't respond to that. There was no point in arguing anymore. I got up and showered, then stood in my closet trying to figure out what to wear. Diane had said something appropriate, nothing too casual, maintaining standards. I pulled out a navy blue dress, conservative and elegant, with a cardigan I could wear in the kitchen if it got too warm. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the anxious woman staring back. When had I become someone who stressed over whether my outfit would meet my mother-in-law's approval? Brandon and I ate a quiet breakfast together, both of us lost in our own thoughts. At 10:45, we got in the car for the 30-minute drive to Beaverton. The streets were quiet, most people staying home on Thanksgiving morning. Brandon turned on the radio to fill the silence, finding a station playing classic rock. As we drove through familiar neighborhoods toward his parents' house, I found myself noticing things I'd overlooked before. The perfectly manicured lawns, the houses that all looked similar, the sense of rigid conformity in this suburban enclave. The Foster home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a large two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. The driveway was already crowded with cars. Tyler and his girlfriend had arrived, as had several of Richard's siblings. We parked on the street and walked up the driveway. Brandon reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you for doing this. It means a lot to my mom." I squeezed back but didn't say anything. We walked up to the front door, and Brandon opened it without knocking, calling out that we'd arrived. The house smelled like turkey and sage, and I could hear voices coming from the kitchen and living room. Diane appeared almost immediately, wearing an apron over her dress, her hair perfectly styled. "Brandon, sweetheart, you're here." She hugged her son tightly, then turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Amanda, thank you for coming early to help. Let me show you what needs to be done." She didn't hug me or even touch me, just gestured toward the kitchen. Brandon kissed my cheek and headed toward the living room where I could hear his father and brother watching football. I followed Diane into the kitchen, where Jessica was already working on something at the counter. Jessica glanced up and gave me a small smile that looked almost apologetic. Diane immediately launched into instructions, showing me where everything was kept, demonstrating how she wanted the napkins folded despite not having the ones she'd wanted me to buy, explaining her system for keeping dishes organized. She spoke quickly, firing information at me like I was a new employee on their first day. "Do you understand all of that?" she asked when she finally paused for breath. I nodded, though my head was spinning with instructions. "Good. Now the turkey needs basting every 30 minutes, starting at noon. I'll set a timer, but I need you to stay aware of it. The timing is crucial." She pulled the massive turkey from the oven, and I had to admit it looked perfect, golden and glistening. I spent the next hour doing exactly what Diane instructed. I folded napkins, arranged appetizer platters, set up the beverage station in the sunroom, with various sodas, sparkling water, wine and beer. I kept the kitchen counters clear, washing dishes as they accumulated. Jessica worked alongside me, but she seemed uncomfortable, not making much conversation. At one point, when Diane left the kitchen to greet more arriving guests, Jessica leaned closer to me. "She's been like this all morning, super controlling about everything. I'm sorry you got pulled into kitchen duty." I appreciated the acknowledgement, even if Jessica wasn't willing to actually challenge her mother about the arrangement. The timer went off at noon, and I carefully basted the turkey, trying to remember exactly how Diane had demonstrated. When she returned to check my work, she frowned slightly, a little more on the left side. "Dear, you want even coverage." She took the baster from my hands and added more, showing me again. By 12:30 more family members had arrived. The house was filling with people, laughter and conversation floating in from the living room and dining room. I could hear Brandon's voice among them, joking with his cousins. I felt a pang of resentment that he was out there enjoying himself while I was stuck in the kitchen being micromanaged. Diane kept finding small things to correct. The way I'd arranged the cheese on the appetizer platter wasn't visually appealing enough. The coffee I'd started brewing was too early. We wouldn't need it for another 2 hours, and it would get bitter. The serving spoons I'd set out were the wrong size for the dishes they'd accompany. Each criticism was delivered with a smile, and a sweetness that made it hard to object without seeming oversensitive. But the cumulative effect was clear. I couldn't do anything right in her eyes. Around 1 o'clock, I needed to use the bathroom. I excused myself and walked through the living room to get to the hallway. Brandon was sitting on the couch with his father and Tyler, a beer in hand, laughing at something on the television. He barely glanced up as I passed. I locked myself in the bathroom and leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection. My carefully applied makeup was still intact, but my eyes looked tired and my jaw was tight with tension. I pulled out my phone and texted Natalie, 3 hours in, and I'm ready to leave. Being treated like hired help while Brandon watches football. She responded immediately. Do you need the turkey emergency call? I smiled despite myself but texted back that I'd stick it out. I'd come this far, I might as well see how the whole day played out. When I returned to the kitchen, Diane was directing Jessica to start bringing appetizers to the dining room. She turned to me with that practiced smile. Amanda dear, I need you to start setting out the serving dishes. I'll show you where everything goes. For the next 45 minutes, I arranged serving platters, filled water glasses, made sure salt and pepper shakers were on the tables, plural because there were 2 tables set up. The main dining table in the formal dining room, beautifully set with china and crystal, and a smaller folding table set up in the sunroom for the younger crowd. I counted the place settings at the main table, 12 chairs. I counted the people I knew were attending who would sit there. Diane and Richard at the heads of the table. Brandon Tyler, Jessica, Richard's brother and his wife. Diane's sister and her husband. Tyler's girlfriend Claire. That was 11. The 12th seat, I realized with a sinking feeling, was probably for a cousin I hadn't accounted for. There was no place for me. The sunroom table was set more casually, with everyday dishes instead of the fancy china. 5 place settings. I knew those would be for the teenage cousins, kids between 14 and 17 who were in the family room playing video games. And apparently me, a 29-year-old woman with a master's degree and a career, sitting with children because I hadn't earned my place with the adults. At 2 o'clock, Diane announced that appetizers were ready, and everyone should help themselves from the dining room buffet. The family members poured in from various parts of the house, filling plates and chatting. I hung back in the kitchen, supposedly finishing up preparations, but really just trying to avoid the awkwardness of joining the crowd. Brandon came in at one point to grab another beer from the refrigerator. He kissed my temple quickly. You doing okay? Everything looks great. Then he was gone again before I could respond. Diane called me into the dining room to help replenish the appetizers. As I was refilling the shrimp cocktail platter, I overheard part of a conversation between Diane and her sister Margaret. She's been helpful today, Diane was saying, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. Very obedient with instructions. Perhaps there's hope for her yet, though time will tell if she truly understands what it means to be part of this family. Margaret made a non-committal sound. You said the same thing about Tyler's ex-wife, and that didn't work out. Diane sighed. Exactly my point. I refuse to make the same mistake twice. I need to be certain before I fully accept another daughter-in-law into our family fold. Brandon should have consulted me more before proposing to her. My hands froze on the serving platter. They were talking about me like I was a probationary employee rather than a family member. I wanted to turn around and confront them. To demand they explain what gave them the right to judge my worthiness. But I knew that would only confirm whatever negative opinions they already held. So I finished refilling the appetizers and walked back to the kitchen, my face burning with humiliation. Jessica found me in the kitchen a few minutes later, leaning against the counter and taking deep breaths to calm myself. She walked over and started rinsing some dishes in the sink, not looking at me directly. I heard what Mom said to Aunt Margaret. I'm sorry, Amanda. She does this with everyone. It's not just you. Her words were meant to be comforting, but they had the opposite effect. If Diane treated everyone this way, if this was an established pattern, then why did Brandon act like I was being unreasonable for objecting to it? Why did the entire family just accept this behavior as normal? I turned to Jessica, keeping my voice low. How long did it take before your mom accepted you as part of the family? Jessica's hands paused in the soapy water. She looked uncomfortable with the question. I was born into it, so it's different. But Claire, Tyler's girlfriend. She's been around for almost a year, and Mom still hasn't warmed up to her. Jessica hesitated, then added quietly, Tyler's ex-wife, the one they divorced. She tried for 3 years. Mom never accepted her. That's actually why they split up. Tyler chose Mom over his wife. The weight of that information settled over me like a heavy blanket. 3 years of trying to prove herself, and it still wasn't enough. And Tyler had chosen his mother over his marriage. I thought about Brandon, about how similar he and Tyler seemed in their devotion to Diane's approval. Would Brandon do the same thing if it came down to it? Would he choose his mother over me? I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Jessica finished with the dishes and dried her hands. Look, if you want my advice, just keep your head down today. Don't give Mom any reason to criticize you. Do everything she asks. Smile. Be gracious. Maybe if she sees you're willing to play by her rules, she'll ease up eventually. But the way Jessica said it, with that defeated tone, made it clear she didn't actually believe what she was suggesting. She'd lived under Diane's control her whole life, and had learned that compliance was easier than resistance. I wasn't sure I was willing to accept that as my future. At 2:30, Diane called everyone to start gathering for dinner. The main meal would be served at 3, but she wanted people to find their seats and get settled. I watched as family members filed into the dining room, exclaiming over how beautiful the table looked, complimenting Diane's china and centerpiece. Brandon sat down in his assigned seat between his father and Tyler, looking perfectly content. He caught my eye and smiled, clearly expecting me to be pleased about how well the day was going. He had no idea that I'd spent the past 4 hours being treated like staff, that I'd overheard his mother discussing me like I was an experiment that might fail, that his sister had just confirmed his mother would likely never accept me no matter what I did. Diane appeared at my elbow, her hand on my arm. Amanda, the young people are gathering in the sunroom. Why don't you go ahead and join them? I'll bring the food out shortly. I looked at the main dining room table, at the 12th chair that remained empty, and something inside me snapped. Actually, Diane, I was hoping to sit with Brandon and the rest of the family. I'm sure we can make room for one more chair at the main table. The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes went cold. Oh, sweetheart, we've been over this. The seating has been carefully planned. You'll be much more comfortable with the younger group. They're lovely kids. I stood my ground, aware that several family members were now watching our exchange. I'd prefer to sit with my husband. Surely there's space for me somewhere. Diane's grip on my arm tightened slightly. Her voice remained sweet, but there was steel underneath. Amanda, dear, I don't think you understand. This is my home, my table, and I decide who sits where. I've explained that you're not quite ready for the main family table. Now please, go join the others in the sunroom, so we can start our meal. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what I would do. I looked at Brandon, silently pleading with him to say something, to stand up for me, to tell his mother that his wife belonged at the table with him. But Brandon was staring at his plate, his jaw tight, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge his mother. Tyler was looking at his phone, pretending not to notice. Richard was examining the centerpiece with sudden intense interest. Not one person in that room was willing to speak up. I felt Jessica's hand on my back, gently guiding me toward the sunroom. Come on, Amanda. Let's just go. The fight drained out of me. I let Jessica lead me away from the dining room, away from my husband, who wouldn't even look at me, away from a family that had made it crystal clear I didn't belong. The sunroom was bright and cold, the folding table set with mismatched plates and paper napkins. 3 teenage boys were already sitting there, Brandon's cousins who I'd met maybe twice before. They looked up from their phones briefly when Jessica and I entered, then went back to scrolling. Jessica gave my shoulder an awkward pat, and then fled back to the main dining room, leaving me alone with 3 teenagers who had no interest in talking to me. I sat down in the chair farthest from everyone, facing the window that looked out on the backyard. Through the doorway, I could hear the sounds of the Thanksgiving meal beginning in the other room. Diane's voice leading everyone in saying grace, the scraping of chairs, the clinking of silverware, the warm buzz of conversation and laughter. I was separated from it by maybe 20 feet, but it felt like miles. One of the cousins, a lanky kid named Austin, who was probably 16, glanced up at me. So, why are you sitting with us? Aren't you married to Brandon? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, I am. But your Aunt Diane thought I should sit here this year. Austin exchanged looks with the other two boys. That's weird. My mom sits with the adults, and she just married into the family last year. She's Uncle Richard's brother's wife, I thought, doing quick mental math. So she was a similar position to me, a newer addition to the family through marriage, and yet she was at the main table while I was exiled to the kids section. Before I could process that information, Diane appeared with plates of food. She set them down in front of each of us, with practiced efficiency. I hope you all enjoy the meal. Amanda, if you need anything, just let me know. She disappeared back to the dining room, before I could respond. I looked down at my plate. The portions were smaller than what I'd seen being served in the other room, and the presentation was decidedly less elegant. It was the same food, but it felt like I was getting the second-hand version of Thanksgiving dinner. I pushed my fork around, not really hungry anymore. The teenagers ate in silence, occasionally showing each other something on their phones, but not including me in any conversation. From the dining room, I heard a burst of laughter, and Richard's voice rose above the others telling some story. I heard Brandon's laugh, that particular sound I usually loved, now making me feel even more isolated and alone. I pulled out my phone under the table and opened my messages. I scrolled to my conversation with Natalie and typed out a message. I'm sitting at a separate table from my husband because I haven't earned the right to sit with the real family. I'm done with this. Her response came within seconds. Are you serious right now? Where is Brandon? I typed back quickly, trying to summarize what had happened. The confrontation with Diane, Brandon's refusal to speak up, being sent to eat with teenagers. Natalie's messages came rapid fire. That is absolutely unacceptable. You need to leave right now. Just walk out. You don't owe these people anything, especially not your dignity. Part of me wanted to do exactly that, to stand up, walk out of this house, and never come back, but another part of me, the part that had been raised to be polite and avoid making scenes, kept me frozen in my chair. What would people think if I just left? What would Brandon say? How would this affect my marriage? I was paralyzed by the weight of those questions. I managed to eat about half of what was on my plate, forcing down food that tasted like sawdust. The teenagers finished quickly and asked if they could go back to playing video games. I nodded, not that they needed my permission, and suddenly I was sitting alone at the folding table in the sunroom, listening to my husband's family enjoy Thanksgiving dinner without me. I felt tears starting to well up, and blinked them back furiously. I would not cry here. I would not give them the satisfaction. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, people started finishing their meals in the dining room. I heard Diane announcing that pie would be served shortly, and people began moving around, some heading to the living room, others stepping outside to the back patio. Brandon appeared in the doorway of the sunroom, looking sheepish. Hey, you okay? The casualness of his question, as if this was just a normal day and not a complete humiliation, made anger flare hot in my chest. No, Brandon. I'm not okay. I just sat alone eating Thanksgiving dinner while you sat with your family, and didn't say a single word in my defense. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing back toward the dining room, like he was worried someone might overhear. Amanda, please don't make this a thing. My mom worked really hard on this meal. Can we just get through the day without drama? Make this a thing. I repeated, my voice low but intense. Your mother exiled me to eat with children. She told me to my face that I'm not good enough for her table. And you sat there silent. You didn't defend me once. Brandon ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was stressed. What did you want me to do? Start a fight with my mom on Thanksgiving in front of the whole family? Yes, I wanted to shout. Yes, that's exactly what you should have done. But instead, I said quietly, I wanted you to choose me. Just once. I wanted you to put your wife first. He opened his mouth to respond, but Diane's voice called from the kitchen. Brandon, sweetheart, can you help your father with something in the garage? Brandon looked relieved at the interruption. We'll talk about this later, okay? He disappeared before I could answer. I sat there alone in the sunroom, staring at my half-eaten plate of food, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. I'd spent 2 years trying to fit into this family, trying to meet standards that were never clearly defined, trying to earn acceptance that would apparently never come. And my husband, the man who'd promised to love and honor me, couldn't even be bothered to speak up when his mother treated me with blatant disrespect. I pulled out my phone again, and this time called my mother. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sounds of her own small Thanksgiving gathering in the background, just her and a few friends since I wasn't there this year. Amanda, honey, how's it going? The genuine warmth in her voice, the simple kindness, broke something loose in me. I found myself telling her everything, my voice shaking as I described the entire day, from the kitchen duties to the overheard conversation, to being sent to sit with teenagers while my husband ate with the adults. My mother listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that cut through all my confusion and self-doubt. Sweetheart, you know what this is, don't you? This is abuse. It might not be physical, but what they're doing to you, the way they're treating you, the isolation and humiliation, that's emotional abuse. And the fact that your husband is allowing it, makes him complicit. Her words hit me like cold water. I'd been thinking of this as a family conflict, a clash of personalities, maybe just unfortunate miscommunication. I hadn't let myself see it for what it actually was. Mom continued, her voice firm but loving. You need to decide right now what you're willing to tolerate. Because this won't get better. People like Diane, they don't suddenly become kind and accepting, they escalate, and if Brandon won't stand up for you now, he never will. You deserve better than this, Amanda. You deserve a partner who protects you, who puts you first, who wouldn't dream of letting his mother treat you this way. I wiped at my eyes, tears finally falling despite my best efforts to hold them back. What should I do? Should I leave? She sighed. Only you can make that decision. But I will tell you this. If you stay, if you allow this treatment to continue, you're teaching them that this is acceptable. You're showing them that you'll tolerate anything. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. We talked for a few more minutes, and by the time we hung up, I'd made a decision. I stood up from the table in the sunroom, left my plate where it was, and walked through the house to find my coat. I ran into Jessica in the hallway. She took one look at my face, and her expression shifted to concern. Amanda, what's wrong? Are you leaving? I pulled my coat from the closet. Yes, I'm leaving. I can't stay here anymore. Jessica glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. If you leave now, Mom is going to be furious. It'll cause a huge scene. I looked at her directly. I know, but staying and accepting this treatment will cause permanent damage to my self-respect. I'm choosing me. Jessica's eyes widened slightly, and I saw something flicker across her face, maybe admiration, maybe envy. She nodded slowly. I understand. Do you want me to get Brandon? I shook my head. No, I'll find him myself. I walked through the house, past family members chatting and laughing, oblivious to my distress. I found Brandon in the garage, with his father looking at some new power tool Richard had purchased. Brandon looked up surprised when I appeared in the doorway. Amanda, what's up? We're ready to go. I need the car keys. He frowned, confusion crossing his face. What? We haven't even had dessert yet. Mom made 3 kinds of pie. I held out my hand. I need the keys, Brandon. I'm leaving. Whether you're coming with me or not is up to you, but I'm leaving now. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked between us, clearly uncomfortable, and quietly excused himself, leaving me and Brandon alone in the garage. Brandon set down the tool he'd been examining and walked over to me. Amanda, you're being ridiculous. You can't just leave in the middle of Thanksgiving. Watch me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm done being treated like I'm not good enough for your family. I'm done sitting at a separate table from my own husband. And I'm done with you choosing your mother's comfort over my dignity. Brandon's expression hardened. So that's what this is about. You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get to sit where you wanted. His dismissiveness, his complete inability or unwillingness to understand what was really happening, confirmed everything I'd been realizing throughout the day. This wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to change. I could either accept a lifetime of being second to his mother's demands, or I could choose myself. I chose myself. The car keys are in my purse, which is in the kitchen. If you won't give me a ride home, I'll call a rideshare. Brandon's jaw clenched. Fine. If you want to make a scene and embarrass me in front of my whole family, go ahead. But don't expect me to come running after you. I turned and walked back into the house, through the kitchen where Diane was cutting pies, past the dining room, where family members were gathering for dessert. I grabbed my purse from where I'd left it on the kitchen counter. Diane looked up, immediately sensing something was wrong. Amanda, dear, where are you going? Dessert is about to be served. I met her eyes directly. I'm leaving. Diane, thank you for having me. Her expression shifted from surprise to barely concealed irritation. Leaving. But we haven't finished the meal. It's tradition to have pie and coffee together as a family. I pulled my purse over my shoulder. I appreciate the tradition, but I won't be staying. I've realized I'm not ready to be part of your family traditions. Maybe I never will be. And that's okay. Not every family is the right fit. The room went quiet as other family members registered what was happening. Diane's face flushed. Well, I think that's very rude, Amanda. I've spent all day preparing this meal, and you're just going to walk out. You're being incredibly selfish. I felt years of trying to please this woman, years of swallowing my feelings, and accepting disrespect, crystallize into perfect clarity. You're right, Diane. I am being selfish. I'm choosing my own well-being and self-respect over your approval. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, but I've spent enough time trying to earn something you were never planning to give. Before she could respond, I walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, and out the front door. The cold November air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time all day. I pulled out my phone and opened the rideshare app, requesting a car to take me back to Portland. The app showed a driver 7 minutes away. I stood on the front lawn of the Foster house, my coat wrapped tight against the chill, and waited. Behind me, I heard the front door open. I turned, half expecting to see Brandon coming after me, ready to apologize or argue or something. But it was Jessica who stepped out, hugging herself against the cold. She walked over to me, looking conflicted. That was really brave, what you just said to Mom. I've never seen anyone stand up to her like that. I gave her a sad smile. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. Jessica nodded, looking back at the house. For what it's worth, I think you're right, about all of it. But I don't know if I could do what you're doing. I've lived under her control for so long. I don't know how to be any other way. I reached out and squeezed her arm. Maybe someday you will. You deserve to make your own choices, Jessica. You deserve to live your own life. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Good luck, Amanda. I hope things work out for you. The rideshare car pulled up, and I got in, giving the driver my address. As we pulled away from the Foster house, I looked back one time. The house was lit up, warm and inviting from the outside, the picture of a perfect family Thanksgiving. But I knew the truth about what happened inside those walls, about the control and judgment, and conditional acceptance. And I knew I was better off on the outside looking in, than trapped inside pretending everything was fine. My phone buzzed repeatedly during the drive home. Messages from Brandon. Some angry, some confused, all of them missing the point entirely. I didn't respond to any of them. I just watched the scenery pass by, suburbs giving way to the city, feeling both terrified and liberated by what I'd just done. When I got back to our apartment, in the Pearl District, I unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet space. It felt different now, knowing what I knew about my marriage, about my husband's priorities, about the future I'd been heading toward if I'd continued to accept this treatment. I made myself a cup of tea, and sat on the couch, still wearing my coat, trying to process everything that had happened. My phone rang, and this time it was Natalie. I told you to text me Turkey, if you needed an out. I would have come to get you myself. I laughed, though it came out a little watery. I know, but I needed to do this on my own. I needed to choose to leave, not be rescued. We talked for over an hour. Natalie listening as I recounted the entire day in detail. She was appropriately outraged on my behalf, and hearing her validate my feelings helped me feel less crazy for how I'd reacted. You did exactly the right thing, she said firmly. And now you need to figure out what comes next. What do you want to happen with Brandon? That was the question I'd been avoiding thinking about. What did I want? Did I want Brandon to come home full of apologies, ready to set boundaries with his mother and put our marriage first? Did I want separation, time apart to figure out if this marriage was salvageable? Did I want divorce, a clean break from a family that would never accept me? I didn't have answers yet. All I knew was that something had fundamentally changed today. I'd seen my husband's true priorities, and they didn't include protecting his wife from his mother's cruelty. I'd seen that no amount of trying, no amount of proving myself, would ever be enough for Diane. And I'd seen that I had the strength to walk away from something that was destroying my sense of self, even when it was scary and uncertain. That night, I slept alone in our bed, Brandon still at his parents' house. I didn't sleep well, my mind replaying the day's events, imagining the conversations that must be happening in Beaverton about my dramatic exit. But when I woke up Friday morning, despite the exhaustion and stress, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.